Alright, so looking at today's review, the first part that we have is a 45, 45, 90, and a 30, 60, 90. So starting with a 45, 45, 90, I know these two sides are equal. Right? We know that x and y in this case are going to be equal. If I had the side to get to the hypotenuse, I multiply by radical 2. So in that case, since I'm going backwards, let me divide by radical 2. So for me to solve for x, let me write 5 radical 2 first, which is what I have. Now let me divide by radical 2. The radical 2's cancel out, so I just get 5. For y, I get 5. Once again, the two sides are equal. These two lengths are equal. To get to the hypotenuse, you multiply by radical 2. If you're doing it backwards, you divide by radical 2. So the 45, 45, 90, we have it for the what? For the first 6 questions. But then we have 30, 60, 90. Let me see. We want to start from the small side. That's the one we want. For us to go to the hypotenuse, we multiply by 2. For us to go to the other side, we multiply by radical 3. So you multiply as long as you start from the small side. Notice how here I'm going to go backwards. So let me do the work here. 5 radical 6 over 2. In this case, I'm going to divide by radical 3. So let me put my radical 3 at the bottom. So I have 5 over 2 to begin with. Simplify your radicals. 6 divided by 3, I'm going to get radical 2. Right? I simplify my radicals. So V is 5 radical 2 over 2. Once again, I divided by radical 3. If there's a radical at the bottom, don't forget to multiply top and bottom by that radical. Now for you, for the hypotenuse, having 5 radical 2 over 2, let me write it. Having 5 radical 2 over 2 multiplied by 2. So I'm going to put a 2 on top. My 2's cancel out. So I'm going to have 5 radical 2. So starting from the small side, to get to the hypotenuse, multiply by 2. Starting from the small side, to get to this other side, multiply by radical 3. And obviously, if you're going backwards, then divide. Let me see how many of these we have in the final. Alright guys, looking at these questions, the 45, 45, 90, and 36 to 90, there's 6 of these on the final. So there are 6 of these. Any questions on our first 12? 6. 2 and 6? Alright, let me get to number 2 first. Let me take a look at number 2. Because this side is 2, I'm going to say y is also 2. Right, those sides are equal. Now for x, let me start with the 2 that I have. But here I have to multiply by radical 2. So I get 2 radical 2. Now looking at question number 6. So I have 9. Let me solve for a. So I have 9. Let me divide it by radical 2. Well, that's 5. Let's check if you're awake, and you are awake. So good job. So looking at y, since this side is 5 radical 2 over 2, to look at y, I'm going to write 5 radical 2 over 2, because it's the same thing. To get the hypotenuse, let me write 5 radical 2 over 2 to begin with, but I know in this case I have to multiply it by radical 2. So I'm going to put it on top. So 5 radical 2 times radical 2, isn't that 5 times 2, which is better known as 10? At the bottom we have a 2. So 10 over 2, we're going to call that 5. Yes. So I know I told you guys can bring a little note card. I will write the formulas. Number 4. Oh, hold on. Number 4, you said M? 8? Yep, that's what you get. Because it's 4 radical 2 times radical 2. That's 4 times 2, which is 8. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions up until 12? 5? See, I read your mind. I was going to do 5 earlier. Looking at A, I want to go 9 divided by radical 2. In this case, I have to divide. No radicals at the bottom, so multiply top and bottom by radical 2. So on the top, we have 9 radical 2. At the bottom, we have 2. For B, I'm going to get 9 radical 2 over 2. 8, okay. So 30, 60, 90. So for me to get Y, I'm going to get the hypotenuse divided by 2. 5 over 2 is a number. Cannot simplify, so that's it for Y. Now to get X, I have to start from the small side. So I have to start with 5 over 2. But in this case, I multiply by radical 3. So let me put the radical 3 on top. There's nothing else I can do, so that's it. We're good? 12? Right, so it's a 30, 60, 90. Let me get the hypotenuse first. So I'm going to start with 2 radical 3 over 3 to begin with. I have to multiply by 2. So let me put a 2 on top. So I'm going to finish with 4 radical 3 over 3. That's for the hypotenuse. Now for y, let me start with 2 radical 3 over 3 to begin with. And then in this case, I have to multiply by radical 3. So that looks like 6 over 3, which is better known as 2. I mean, you guys see where I got my 6, right?
So the short side going to the hypotenuse is multiplying by 2?
Yes.
And then divide by 2?
Yes.
Wait, so it's when you went to x, did you just multiply by 2?
Yeah, just multiply by 2.
And then with y, you divide by 3?
Multiply by radical 3.
Oh, multiply by 3.
Yeah. Number 9?
Might as well do all of it since I told you.
Alright guys, so we're dealing with a 30, 60, 90. So starting from the short side to get to the hypotenuse. So let me write 4 radical 5 to begin with. To get the hypotenuse, I have to multiply this by 2. So I'm going to finish with 8 radical 5. Now to get the the longer side, wide, so I have 4 radical 5 to begin with. This case, multiply by radical 3. So we finish with 4 radical 15. Okay, so for number 11, let's see. I want to get the small side first, right? Let me do the work here because it doesn't fit there. So I have 8 radical 15 over 3 to begin with. This case, I have to divide by 2, right? So I'm going to put the 2 at the bottom. I can simplify that. So I'm going to finish with 4 radical 15 over 3.
Wait, did you divide it by 2 because you went to 1?
Yeah, because I divided by 2 because I was getting the small side. So that's where the 4 comes from, right? Because I divided by 2. No. No, you have to go through the small side. So now, to get this, let me start, like I said, we want to start with what we have from the small side. So let me start with 4 radical 15 over 3. This case, I have to multiply by radical 3. So I have 4 radical 45 over 3. But radical 45, that can be simplified. Just 40, radical 45 by itself is 3 radical 5. So technically on the top, I have 12 radical 5 over 3, which is better known as 4 radical 5. We left your paper down here. Okay, we left your paper. We should have left your paper there.
What's there for radical 5?
12 divided by 3.
Oh,
So 4 radical 5. Once again, from the small side to the hypotenuse, you multiply by 2. From the small side to the other side, you multiply by radical 3. And if you're going backwards, then you divide.
how would you do number 10?
I think that's the only one left. Let's take a look at number 10. All right, it's a 30, 60, 90. So starting from the small side, to get to the hypotenuse, I'm going to have 7 times 2, which is better known as 14. To get wide, I start with 7, because I always start with the small side. Start with 7, and you multiply by radical 3. So we get 7 radical 3. So once again, there's 6 of these on the final. If you guys still want more review, feel free to ask for more review, and I can print it out for you. Okay, so let's move on to number 13. Find the value of each trigonometric ratio. Remember, the word ratio, it's fraction. The word that means a fraction. Trigonometric, from trigonometry, the only thing we have learned is SOHCAHTOA. So I'm asking you guys for the ratio using SOHCAHTOA. And we're going to be looking at this. The angle is going to be at a corner Z. So let me mark my Z. It's going to be looking from that angle. I know from this 3, the biggest side is the hypotenuse. From the angle, the side that is farthest away is the opposite, and the one that's next to it is the adjacent. Cosine starts with a C for cosine. So from SOHCAHTOA, the one that starts with a C is ka. That means cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, which is 35 over 37. And obviously, if you can simplify the fraction, simplify it. There's 4 of these on the test. Any questions on the ratios? Then, starting at number 19, find the missing side, round to the nearest tenth. So 1 decimal place. So we have the hypotenuse. From 58 degrees, we have the adjacent. So from SOHCAHTOA, the one that has an 8 and H is ka. That means cosine of 58 degrees is 18 over x. Cosine of 58 and x are going to switch sides because x is at the bottom. So I'm going to have that x is equal to 18 over cosine of 58. But then I gave you guys a chart. And then if you guys don't have it, I will provide it for the test anyways. But I gave you guys a chart. I gave you guys cosine of 58. And then if you guys look on the chart, it should say 0.5299. So I'm going to have 18 divided by 0.5299. And then round it to 1 decimal place, and you should get 34.0. Right. And then there's 4 of these on the test as well. So any questions from 19 through 24? Then, looking at 25, find the measure of the indicated angle to the nearest degree. So we have the hypotenuse, we have the adjacent. I don't know the angle, so I'm going to call it x. So we have that cosine of x. I'm using a and h again. So cosine of x is equal to 14 over 24. So for inverse, I'm going to switch these 2 things. So I'm going to call this cosine inverse of 14 over 24. It's x. So in my case, I had to get the decimal first, and then you said a cosine inverse. So it says 54.3, but since we're going to the nearest whole number, we're going to round this to 54 degrees. For your calculator, make sure you guys are on degrees. I know this is the last part that we saw for the year. I didn't want to leave this as the very last part because it was pretty simple. I left for the last part what I felt you guys needed more help with. So we're going to look at distance formula. We're going to look at solving by elimination. We're going to look at solving by substitution. We're going to do, there's still a review tomorrow, but I'm leaving that. I figured it was the hardest part, so I'm going to leave it at the end so it's the freshest that you have in your mind. If we had done it on Monday instead of tomorrow, you might forget it by the test. So like I said, I wanted to leave the hardest part till the end, just so it's a little bit fresh. But any questions? Let me take 12 really quick.